All right, so I've gardened all of my adult life, but I didn't start gardening large scale until Flagstaff Food Link had a meeting and they were promoting selling at the farmer's market. And Flagstaff Food Link actually rented a booth and they called us the backyard gardeners and opened it up for us to come in and sell any excess. So I started selling my excess there. And after a couple of years, I started actually growing to produce to sell at the market, and eventually got my own booth, and eventually expanded it to 2 booths, and now we're up to the size of 3 booths selling at the farmer's market. And when I first moved to Flagstaff, an acquaintance of mine, as we moved in, and I said I wanted to garden, said, "Oh, you can't garden at Flagstaff." And it's just not true. It can be difficult, but once you learn a few tricks, it really isn't that hard. The biggest 2 problems in Flagstaff, in my opinion, are the shortness of the growing season. So I've seen frosts as late as June 24th and freezes in early September. So that basically gives you an assured 60 days of a growing period. But usually we have 3 months and sometimes even longer. So the other big problem is water. It's arid zona. It's dry here. So there isn't a lot of water. And there are various ways around that. We collect some rainwater, but basically depend on the local water system to get our water, and so we have a very large water bill. So I have to sell at the farmer's market to pay my water bill. But it works out. I have a 5-acre parcel here, but there is only 1/3 of an acre under cultivation. I have a very large greenhouse, and that allows me to control the climate so I can grow exotic things like ginger and turmeric and loofah sponges. And it also allows me to extend my growing season so I don't have to worry about early frosts for things like tomatoes and peppers. And it allows me to get crops to the farmer's market early in the spring that otherwise I wouldn't have anything to sell. I also start all of my own seedlings in the greenhouse, but I always started my seedlings myself anyway. Before the greenhouse, I started it in the house, and I just used grow lights and got the seedlings to start. So you don't have to have a greenhouse to start your own seedlings and get them going really early. Nor do you have to have a greenhouse to get your tomatoes and peppers and things out early and get a full 3-month growing season. There are all kinds of season extenders you can use. So I use these things called walls of water. Let me show you one. They've been around for a really long time. They used to be cheap, but they're not anymore. But you can get many, many seasons of use out of them. Essentially, let's see if this one is intact. It is not. Yeah, these are the bags of our broken ones. Essentially, it's a series of tubes that are fastened. They go over the plant. So you plant your seedling first, and then to make it easy, you take a 5-gallon bucket, like a Home Depot bucket, those orange things, and you upend it over your plant, open end, down, and then you put the wall of water around that bucket. And then with a hose, you fill each of these chambers with water. And then when you remove the bucket, this thing makes a little teepee full of water, and the water heats up during the day and holds that heat. And your little tomato plant or pepper plant, you can put them out at the beginning of April and they will survive. They might grow out of the wall of water and the top part could freeze, but the tomato or pepper will survive. So you can get them out real early and beat that 2-month growing season, and the complaint around here is I put tomatoes in and all I got were green tomatoes. Well, yeah, I'd get red tomatoes in my greenhouse, but I get red tomatoes outside too. See if we can find one.
What varieties of tomatoes do you usually grow?
I have,
Do you
there are
like
a bunch of different varieties that I plant.
Okay.
I get most of my seeds from Johnny's, but I've tried all kinds of varieties, so I know which ones I like. And I'm always trying something new. But let's see, this is a mixed row. There's one in here that is my second year trying. It's called Big Boy. It's a hybrid. And I got those from all the tomatoes I got from Johnny's. Some of the things Johnny's doesn't have, like the type of bean that I like to grow or the type of corn that I like to grow. So I get those from other people that supply them.
Okay.
But I've got, I always grow sun golds.
And those are yellow cherry tomato.
Those are, yeah, golden cherry tomatoes.
Oh, beautiful.
And this is a ripe one. They're ripe when they're gold. You'll never see these in a grocery store because when they are perfectly ripe, they crack.
Oh.
And so they won't sell them at grocery stores. But that's, just before they crack, if you can kind of dial that in, is when they're best to eat. So I always grow these. And then I grow one called Sun Peach, which is supposedly its cousin, but I don't think that means anything to the growing people. It's a cherry tomato that's red, and it's not as sweet as Sun Gold, but it's pretty darn sweet. And I think it has more of a tomatoey flavor.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that. And then I grow one called Mountain Magic, and that's this one here. I just harvested, so there aren't going to be a lot of ripe ones, but you can see these will be ripe by next weekend. This is a slightly larger tomato, and anything with the mountain prefix, like Mountain Magic, Mountain whatever, is disease resistant. So tomatoes get diseases, so you might want to get a disease resistant variety. And then, I've tried a number of other ones. I've got Brandywine, which is an heirloom in the greenhouse. I've never had great luck with it, but I had a lot of seeds, so I keep trying. Some other weird ones that I got from some strange seed companies I can't remember the name of, so they're out here. I don't know which ones they are, but I keep records. I have a permanently bound notebook, and every year I have a map of where I'm growing what, and then I record my results. I mean, one of the noteworthy entries in it is, don't grow more than 2 zucchini plants, stupid. But this was before I was selling at the farmer's market, so anybody that grows zucchini knows to keep your windows up in the summer when you go to church, otherwise you're going to find zucchinis on your seat, on the seat of your car.
Mm-hmm.
This is a 60-foot by 48-foot greenhouse that I got maybe 5 years ago, and I got it with help from the USDA. They have soil conservation grants. I can't remember the abbreviation. There's some kind of, four-letter thing, NRCS or something. They'll help you buy a greenhouse, and it's really easy to apply for, and the criteria are really loose. So if you're serious about growing, you might consider applying for it. And the USDA people in town here, they have an office, can help you apply for it. But this is where I on this bench, it's a mess right now. In the spring, it's full of seedlings. In early spring in the farmer's market, I sell garden starts to people because I don't have that much ready. But then I also have some of the early peppers, chard, kale, bok choy, lots of basil, early tomatoes, so that I can get those sorts of things to the market by May. And then when the outdoor ones start producing, then I have a lot more. And some of the exotics that I'm growing, this thing here is a loofah plant. So the loofah sponge that you may have heard of is actually a gourd. They get really, really big. You can see that it's blooming. And they are supposedly, I've never tried one, they are supposedly edible when they're small. Here's a little one just starting. And there's a bigger one. But you know, when they're about this big, you're supposed to be able to eat them. They probably taste something like zucchini. And then when they're ripe, you just peel it and you have sponge. That are a staple to eat. In South American countries, you eat the underground rhizome. It's like a root, but technically not a root. And I've had them before, and they're very, very, very sweet. So I've been growing them in pots, and I finally put them in the ground because they won't make that edible part in a pot. There's not enough room. So hope to get some of that. And they have the texture of a jicama, but they're real sweet, good in salads and those sorts of things. I have some tropical milkweed growing here. And then outdoors I have a whole bunch of other varieties of milkweed for the monarch butterflies. So those are fun. I also grow, and we're talking exotics here, ginger over here. Last year I just had maybe 6 ginger plants and got a good harvest of the ginger roots and was able to dry it and powder it, and it's just wonderful ginger. So I have a whole lot more. And down at this end, I have turmeric. So here are some turmeric plants there. And then behind this tangle of tomatillos, there's actually a volunteer. I guess I didn't get all of the turmeric root when I harvested last year.
Oh wow, that's nice and big.
It's beautiful leaf. So that's a much older turmeric plant that volunteered there. So you can see my cucumbers growing here. I grow my rosemary inside because in Flagstaff, rosemary won't survive outside. So I have a lot of rosemary.
If you would talk about maybe your irrigation strategies, like in here and outside.
Okay.
It looks like you're doing kind of a similar drip tape.
Drip tape. Are you using the drip tape?
I'm not currently, just because most of our plants are very small and that it's difficult.
Yeah,
in
I'm
pots.
happy to talk about this. So I irrigate both inside and outside with a system that's called a drip tape system. So the line that supplies them is just 1/2 inch, I don't know what. It's the feeder line, and you poke holes in it, and then you can get these little fittings. I use ones with a valve because I like to be able to control each individual row, but if you don't need that, you can just get the fitting that has the part that goes into the hole you punch and the part that goes into the drip tape, and it's cheaper to get them without the control. So once you punch the hole, the small end goes into the hole like that, and then this is the drip tape. It has holes periodically, and when you buy the drip tape you can select how close you want the holes. This fits over the larger end of the fitting, and you push it on and then just tighten it. And they are so easy to use. I've used that soaker hose stuff that they sell in the local hardware stores, and that tends to get real brittle. You have to use those hose clamps on it and tighten them down and buy a bunch. They're just awful and they don't last. This stuff I reuse and reuse, and what's really cool about this is if you get a leak, there is a fitting to fix it. So I had a leak here. I cut out the part of the drip tape that was leaking, and you just take this, put it on, tighten it down, put it on, voila.
Nice.
No more leak. I can't say enough in praise of this. The only thing I don't like about it is that these valves can be hard to turn.
Okay.
But the company has begun to address that, and they are now making valves with an easier to turn handle.
Nice.
So yeah, so now you can only purchase this stuff online right now.
Okay.
And there are two companies. One is called DripWorks, and the other is Nolts, N-O-L-T''S, Midwest. The DripWorks company is a little easier to use. They explain their products a little better. They're a hair more expensive than the Nolts Midwest. But if you're just getting started, you should probably get it from DripWorks, learn what you need, what you like, and then you can get it from Nolts and save a little bit of money doing that.
Do you have this, so is this set up on a timer, or do you manually
No, I do
turn
this
it on?
all by hand.
Okay.
Here, if you come out here, I'll show you the. Yeah. So let me finish with the greenhouse first, though.
Yeah.
So we put this greenhouse in, and then I decided that I wanted it to be both heated and cooled. So this is the world's largest swamp cooler, and it does a good job of keeping the temperature below 90. And then to heat it, we have an electric heater in each corner, and of course, as soon as we installed the electric heaters, our electric bill went up. So
I bet.
we got a solar system. We have 32 solar panels that collect electricity and knock the electric bill back to where I don't pay any electricity from like April through October.
Nice.
And then minimal in the winter when the heaters are actually working. So that made it doable.
Yeah, I guess, I was curious because I've mostly heard of people heating greenhouses using propane as their main source, and the argument being that electricity is not as efficient at heating.
Yeah.
But if you're using solar panels, then I'm sure that makes, efficiency-wise.
Yeah,
that makes a
propane
difference.
might make sense, but it is not what I say is EC, ecologically correct.
Right.
Because it's a fossil fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So by going solar, I'm not polluting.
Right.
So yeah, I prefer that to propane.
Right.
We ran water out here. It just comes from our house. So this is a freeze-proof. It's not a well or anything. It's not even a pump. It just connects to the house water. And then this thing here is called a manifold. So I've got one going into the greenhouse, and then on the greenhouse I have another manifold, so there are 4 stations in the greenhouse. And then this one goes to the west side of the garden, and I have 2 controllers out there. And then this one goes to the east side. I have another manifold there. There are 4 stations. So it's a complicated drip system. I'm like the only person who can operate it because nobody else knows how it works. But from one source then, I'm allowed to fine-tune my watering. And then of course each row, the drip tape has its own valve, so I can fine-tune it even more. Let's get done with this. Birds were eating my snap peas, and we just can't have this. So we put up all of these hoops, and I strung the bird netting on it. Bird netting was only $80 for enough bird netting to do this whole thing the first time I did this. It's gone way up since then, so I'm thinking of replacing the bird netting with chicken wire and having it be permanent, because we have to take this down in the winter. It won't survive the winter. The snow will build up on it. It won't go all the way through, and then it rips, and it's no good for the following year. So I may invest in chicken wire and just leave it in place. What I'm doing now is, this year, this is all snap peas. And these rows closest to us already bore and they're done bearing, and so I pulled them out and replanted. And so these, with luck, will produce again by mid-September.
Nice.
In the distance are the snap peas that are still producing. So this whole, like, quarter of the garden is snap peas. People love snap peas.
Yeah, and they're cold hardy.
Yeah.
So
This part was snap peas last year, so you can see the infrastructure, the PVC hoops, and I'll move the snap peas back over here because you want to rotate your crops.
right.
If you plant the same crop over and over in the same spot, you're basically planting it where the pests that will eat it and the diseases that will infect it are already present, waiting for that plant to grow there again. So you want to fool them, you want to outwit them. So you rotate your crops, and not just, I'm not going to plant snap peas here this year. I am not going to plant any type of pea here this year, and I probably wouldn't plant beans there either because they're in the same family. So when you're rotating crops, you want to rotate by family. So varied stuff here. Cabbages, cauliflower. Under this, what we call floating row cover, there's a PVC hoop, and then you can buy, and again online is the best place to purchase it, various weights of floating row cover which lets light through, lets water through. This is light enough that it won't let insects in. You can get it heavy enough that it will increase the temperature underneath by up to about 10 degrees if it's heavy enough. So you can increase the length of your growing season by covering it with the correct weight of floating row cover. This floating row cover I've got over the Swiss chard to keep the grasshoppers out. So it's just insect that we're trying to keep out because they were really eating the Swiss chard, and I don't like to share. Then this is just varied stuff. I've got potatoes out here, some bunching onions. Here's some peas that are gone by. I'm saving the seed on these, so they look real bad, but I'll be able to harvest and plant my own seed next year. Oops, they haven't dried, so that's not going to make seed. But you get the idea. So you can save your own seed, but not if it's a hybrid.
Right.
So this wasn't a hybrid. Okay, so these little bumps that you can see there, there's a few there, and there, and there, and there, and there. They're called root nodules, and they house bacteria that take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into a form that plants can use. And so all members of the pea or bean family can do this. They're called nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They may or may not be in the soil. So I buy a mixture of dried bacteria and apply it to my pea and bean seeds when I plant them. And that assures that the little nitrogen-fixing bacteria will be present. It increases the yield of your crop. Unfortunately, you can't purchase it locally. You can only get it from seed catalogs, so online. And it only lives for a year. That's a milkweed patch there.
Wow, that's a lot of milkweed.
Yeah, I participated in a milkweed experiment some years ago, and they gave me like 10 different varieties of milkweed, and that one thrived and is like taking over. It's weedy. But I do have, I don't know if I can find it again, a monarch larva on it.
Oh, nice.
And it was there a couple days ago, but there's no guarantee that it'll stay. Ooh, there's some other kind of insect. Oh, here it is.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Yeah, isn't that fun?
Yeah.
And then this little twitchy caterpillar, this thing, I don't know what it is, but you know, it's milkweed. It's got to fend for itself. Sometimes this fence isn't enough to protect from deer or elk. So what we do, if we have evidence that they've gotten in here, is we extend the fence with short pieces of PVC that we just wire onto these T-posts, and then we put flagging, string flagging between those, and the animal, the elk, is tricked into thinking that the fence goes like 8 feet tall, and
nice.
it stops them.
Nice.
It's a real good way to keep those herbivores out.
Very good.
All right. I used to have a little teeny weeny greenhouse over here, but I took it out. Now I just use this for miscellaneous. I've got flowers here. A grape growing up against the wall. Grapes do really well in Flagstaff because they bloom later than other fruit crops. So you get grapes most of the time. This year, not so much, but yeah. And here I've just got some squash. This was my second greenhouse. My idea here was I was going to plant fruit trees and get fruit because you don't get, tree fruit here in Flagstaff because of the late frosts. But I still don't get tree fruit. I don't know why. I don't think the pollinators make it in there, and they tend to bloom real early. So I'm gradually transitioning over where I just plant general things in here. And what I've got in here, besides weeds, is some melons.
Nice.
And they're in the greenhouse because they like it hot, so they do well in here. In the backyard, I have raised beds. And I used to rant against raised beds. They tend to dry out faster. It's a lot of work to build them, and it uses resources.
Right.
But as I get older, I love them because I can sit and harvest. And if you build a raised bed, you can line the bottom with hardware cloth or that real fine grade chicken wire. Hardware cloth will last longer, and you won't get gophers in there.
Do you have a large problem with gophers?
We have yes.
Do you just set traps for them?
Is all we do for them.
Right.
Yeah. Do you have gophers?
We do. Yeah, we do have some gopher problems, and similar thing. We trap them. We have a cat that occasionally brings us one, which we appreciate.
So, one more harvest of lettuce out of this patch, and then I'll plant it to something else. Some spinach there, and this little patch is shady, so that's good for the spinach this time of year because it likes it cool.
Mm-hmm.
One of my original fruit trees, I've lived in this spot for 30 years. I've gotten apples off of this tree once, but they were good apples. Two of several grapevines that are wonderful and have been very productive in the past. They're producing a little bit this year, not nearly as much as they usually do, but that's okay. I've gotten so many grapes that I didn't know what to do with them. I have permanent herb beds around the edge of this little sitting area. So most of these are what you're, don't trip over that. Most of these are perennials, which means they'll come up again. Again, under row cover there are two raised beds that have the strawberries in them, and the grasshoppers and birds were eating the strawberries, so that's covered to keep them out. Okay, let's go back out the way we came. And I'll show you again, this is on that drip tape system. With the drip tape, your garden hose goes here. You need a filter, and this is a pressure reducer because it's a low pressure system. If you have full water pressure, it'll explode the tape.
Okay.
So, and again, with either the Drip Works or the Nolts, these things are pretty cheap to buy. Trees here are fruit trees that when I first moved in and didn't know what I was doing, I thought maybe I'd get fruit in Flagstaff. So they're still there, but I don't get fruit. Everything is fenced to keep elk and deer and rabbits out. So the fence is only 5 feet tall. Not real effective against deer and elk, but it seems to discourage them pretty much. And then along the bottom of each fence, I've got chicken wire because the rabbits can obviously get through this fence. I like this type of fencing. I don't know what its actual name is. It's a type of fencing that if you're laying concrete, you put this stuff, it's not even fencing, you put this stuff down on the concrete and it's supposed to reinforce it. The reason I like this is if you're growing something that's climbing on it, like these beans or a tomato plant, for example, and I'm here, if I have any other type of fence here, the tomato I want is going to be on the other side of this fence and I can't reach through it because the opening is too small. I can reach through this and get whatever is on the other side. So that's why I like this fencing. It's sturdy, it rusts, so it's not really pretty, but it sure does the job. Now in this garden I have all of my onions and leeks and a bunch of spinach. Some of it's bolting, some of it isn't. And then around the edges I always plant beans, and I said to rotate your crops, but sometimes I can't. There's exceptions. Well, last year I had cucumbers around me, so they did get rotated, and I try to rotate them, but back to beans this year. This was tomatoes last year, so there's nothing related to a tomato in here at all from different families.
Nice.
This is my black gold.
So is this where you get all of your...
Well, we hauled this in from a neighbor. This is all horse manure. And we fertilize extensively with horse manure. Flagstaff soils tend to have all of the nutrients needed except they're a little low in nitrogen, therefore the horse manure. And then anything organic you can put in, including horse manure, helps to improve the texture of the soil so it holds water better, because our soils are cindery or sandy. They drain really well, and so this helps with that. And I collect it wherever I can. And then this is our composting operation. We built these bins out of these things.
Pallets?
Pellets, yeah, which you can get for free. And then in this one we store all of our organic waste, so we've been weeding, so this is now full of weeds. And then we chop it up, because if you're going to build compost, if the weed is intact, it'll decompose, but it'll take a whole lot longer than if you chip it or shred it. So I have a chipper shredder, which is this thing here, where you feed your organic stuff in and it chops it up into little pieces, and then it decomposes a whole lot faster.
Okay.
Yeah. And so here we have 2 bins that have active compost. Woo! Hot. I just took the temperature of this compost. It's been brewing for about 2 weeks, and it was 162 degrees. 160 is perfect, so this is just great. So, and that's the heat is generated by the bacteria and fungi that are breaking down this material.
And do you turn this pretty frequently?
Okay. And water. And then this is the older compost. It's not ready to use yet, but you know, it's breaking down nicely. And so for the compost, we put our chipped and shredded garden waste, we put manure, and then we put some stuff called Compost Starter, which I saw it here somewhere. It was clipped.
Oh, it's on the fence over here.
Oh, there it is,
Or
yeah.
on the pallet.
Compost Starter. And this just gets your compost going. So, and originally when I was trying to do compost, I couldn't get it to decompose. And basically, my joke was that I'm making fossils. And I know a lot of you have that same problem. So I started using this stuff, which you get at Warner's. And I think it's the only place in town that sells it, although Viola's may. And you just sprinkle a little on each layer. And then you water it well. So in order to make compost, you don't have to have an exact mixture of anything, but you've got to have your carbon sources, your lawn clippings, and all of your garden waste. You've got to have a source of nitrogen, which is the manure, and then this actually has little bacteria spores in it that helps to get it started, so you sprinkle some of that. So the key to good composting is to have your nitrogen, to have your carbon, and your bacteria. Wet it and turn it fairly frequently, like once a month. And you actually will build compost, not just fossils.
Right.
This is what I call my main garden. This was my original garden, and it was actually smaller too, because this is an extension of it. These are all a variety of dried beans, so I can't even walk in there anymore, and I can't weed it, so there are some weeds in there. And when the beans turn brown and are brittle, then they're ready to harvest. So at that point I'll be able to walk on it and it won't be hurting the plants because they'll be done. This is a variety of corn that you can only get from Stokes. Now, it's not the only variety of corn that's good, but it's one of the ones that's called the super sweet, and I've grown it for a number of years and I love it. It takes 72 days, so it's within that window of, you know, when you can expect to get it. And it's just really, really, really sweet. And it stays sweet for about 10 days. So this is just my favorite corn. And it is a yellow and white kerneled corn. This has been eaten by insects, so that's not a good one to show you. And to see if the corn is ready, I actually go through and I'll pull back some of the husk. And see, that's not ready. But you can see that, I don't know, can you see the colors?
Yeah, you can see the colors.
It's got yellow and white kernels.
What's the name of the variety?
It doesn't have a name, it just has a number.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know offhand.
That's fair. It's harder to remember a string of numbers than it is to remember
But Stokes also quit selling to the public now.
Really? So
Yeah.
it's only if you're running a farm. Okay.
So, I mean,
That's a
I
bummer.
am officially a farm, and then you have to buy a certain quantity, which is certainly more than any backyard gardener is going to need.
Right.
But there are, any of the super sweet varieties do pretty well. What I've done with this is I've gotten 4 planting beans a week apart. So this little patch here is 8 rows, was the first planting, and we're harvesting it now, and it is what, August 15th, August 16th today, but yesterday I was able to take corn to the market. This is the second planting. It's getting close. The third planting is here, and you can see by the color of the silks that it's not anywhere near, because the silks turn all brown when it's ready. And the fourth planting is a very small one because it's a real risk. But it's tasseling now, these little rows over there. Corn is wind pollinated. So if you plant a single row of corn, you're likely to not get any corn, because the pollen is produced here in the tassels. The corn is produced down here, and these are called ear shoots. The pollen has to land on the silk where it's caught. And the wind pollination means that gravity isn't going to help. So it's going to keep the corn from inbreeding, because this plant isn't going to pollinate this plant. But one over here, if the wind's coming in this direction, can blow the pollen from here down onto these ear shoots, pollinate it, and make corn. So inbreeding isn't good in plants or anything. So anyway, if you plant a single row of corn, the wind's just going to blow all the pollen away. But if you have 4 rows, the wind will blow the pollen from the first row onto the second row, and so on and so forth. So the rule of thumb with corn is never plant less than 4 rows. So if you only want to plant 8 corn plants, plant 4 rows with 2 plants in each row. Otherwise you won't get corn. This is asparagus. Doesn't look like asparagus, does it? Asparagus is a long-lived perennial, and you only eat it in the spring when these plants send out their little shoots. And after a while, like 6 weeks, you have to quit eating it and let it grow, because it's photosynthesizing and capturing the energy that it'll use to make next year's shoots, which you can eat for only 6 weeks, and then you just have to let it grow again. So this is what it looks like when it grows. Asparagus is fun. It makes these red berries that have seeds inside, and the birds take the berries and they scatter them all over. So I've got asparagus like coming up everywhere. Okay, raspberries are here. This used to be the border between two gardens, but it isn't anymore, so we've taken out the fence. But the raspberries used to be along the border. Now they're just freestanding. It's blooming. And I've tried lots of different raspberries. This variety has been the best for me. It's called Anne. It makes a golden raspberry, and it bears on this year's canes and last year's canes. So these are this year's canes. Last year's canes would have leafed out first and borne and then died. So there aren't any last year's canes here. Then it'll also produce canes this year that will bear. So it's an ever-bearing raspberry. Much more of a sure thing for Flagstaff than others.
So after the first canes produce, do you cut them back so that the next ones will come?
Well, what I do is I leave them, and then next spring the ones the ones that bore before won't leaf out.
Okay.
So I cut them back then.
Okay.
But mine all died because of winter, so I actually didn't get any of last year's fruits. Here's one of my volunteer asparaguses that the birds spread. Now there is a path here. These are beans.
Wow.
Beans.
That's a lot of beans.
Yeah. So there's only 2 rows that are green beans. The rest are all various colors of dried beans. And I harvest my dried beans and I shuck them out while I'm watching TV, and then I set the jars of various colored beans on my counter and I admire them. That's what I do. I'm not a great consumer of dried beans, but I love the dried beans. That's crazy, isn't it? And then like just one last thing to see. Down here I have my various winter squashes. So pumpkins, acorn squash, spaghetti squash. You can see a little pumpkin there. Just starting to turn color. These aren't jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. These are pie pumpkins, so they're smaller. And they're just tucked in here. They go wherever I can fit them. And that is it.
Well, that's quite a bit.
It's only 1/3 of an acre.
So are you able to, I mean, what portion of your living is coming from your farm?
It's a hobby for me.
Okay.
So I don't know what portion of my income, but I don't depend on it.
Yeah.
So that takes a lot of the pressure off. If the whole thing failed, I'd be fine. I'm retired and we planned for retirement. So yeah, it's not essential for us.
That's fair.
Yeah, I have nothing but respect for people who do it for a living, because you're living on the edge the whole time.
Yeah, depending on the weather all the time.
Yeah, depending on the weather, the source of water, whether seeds are available. Like in the pandemic, I saved some of my own seeds, so I would be okay in case of that. But I definitely grow all the food for my family, all of it. And for a lot of other people too. So I do it because I love doing it. I mean, I'm a botanist. Plants are my life.